Hello and welcome to episode 13 of We'll Review It Our Shelves, the podcast where we review the movies on our shelves. Every 2 weeks we'll take a randomly selected movie from our collection and we'll review it ourselves. I'm Brian Morgan and my co-host is...
Dan Bergman.
Okay, so episode 13 for you triskaidekaphobes. Try to get through that 13 number. I'll try not to say 13 too many times. And we will be doing something a little bit different. We will be discussing some genres that feature reasonably heavy on our shelves. Dan has selected horror, and I have selected musicals, because as we've discussed before, they're kind of big influences in our movie collections. We're going to start off with horror and let Dan go do that thing. But I got to ask, Dan, how did horror movies get on your shelf?
Well, that's a deeper question than we're normally used to answering. It's like when it's one movie, it's like, well, because I liked it. This is a much more nuanced story because it's my fascination with horror movies has been a long and interesting evolution, I should say. I mean, I guess we'll have to go back to, when I was a wee little lad back in the 1970s. And growing up in
the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
Disco was king.
Disco, yeah. It's funny, I kind of earned the nickname Disco Dan, and it's like, I don't know if they knew that I was born in the 70s, but they just started, guys at work started calling me Disco Dan, so it's like, huh, okay, I'll accept that.
Well, Disco's a horror movie in and of itself. I'm kidding.
Some people would agree. But growing up in my household, at the time, the only acceptable and most frequent horror-type movie that I was exposed to was the old Universal legacy monsters, because there was Frankenstein, there was Dracula, there was the Wolfman, and when you're still age single-digit numbers, that was scary enough. So it wasn't fun at the time, I was scared, but for some reason, always came back, and you always like, hey, Dracula's on. I'm like, okay, I'll watch it, and then you have to spend the night under your blankets
with a flashlight.
Well, yeah, with the flashlight, because you're scared that Dracula's gonna come get you. And, as the 70s progressed, I got more exposure to scarier things. And I don't know if you remember Leonard Nimoy's little documentary show that he had.
In Search of?
In Search of, yes.
I do.
Oh, yeah. And in the 70s, there was a big craze for Bigfoot. Everybody was seeing Bigfoot. There were movies about Bigfoot or gross exaggerations of such. There was one that was, I forget the title. I don't own it because it was only like one scene that stuck out of my head, and they always played it on TV for the commercials where, supposedly a Bigfoot walked by the window and the girl was sitting next to the window. She opened the drapes to see what the noise was, and a big hairy hand comes through reaching for her. And yeah, as a child, that scared me.
And you had mentioned that during our Scooby-Doo episode, so I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, and so my biggest fear was, always looking out the window and seeing Bigfoot looking right back at me. And that fear was just always amplified because there was all these stories that said this is real. He's out there. Again, young, impressionable child, you really took that to heart. And then there was the Amityville craze, where the Lutz's story came out about their experiences in their haunted house. And it was always in the news. And again, In Search of did an episode. And again, all these ghost stories were supposedly real, and that really scared me. And, of course, I was really exposed to it because my sister did a book report on the Amityville Horror, and she watched the movie, which, looking back, was probably her way of cheating for that book report. I don't know. I'm suspecting.
I'm not saying that I ever did that when I was a kid in school, but...
but we know you did, because we all did.
May or may not have watched The Red Badge of Courage instead of reading the book.
Yeah. So there was all this exposure to things that scared me. And again, like I said, as a child, it wasn't fun. But I got used to it, and it just became this kind of fascination now. I don't know what the psychology of it was, but then I started looking for things to scare me. Fast forward to the 80s, when horror movies really kind of took off.
Yeah, they had a bit of a renaissance.
A lot of film critics would say so. I developed kind of a paradoxical relationship because on one aspect, I had this strange fascination with horror movies, but my mother absolutely forbid a lot of the horror movies of the time. You know, she thought they were trash. They was like so unnecessary. Why do people even watch these? But at the same time, we'd watch movies like Jaws together. And yeah, it was scary.
Is that considered a horror movie, or is that a suspense thriller?
I would say a little bit of both. Because one aspect of a lot of horror movies is that, you know, you keep the creature hidden. And seeing that Jaws takes place a lot during the daylight, you wouldn't think it would be scary. Because, I mean, people walking on the beach during the day, not a very scary thing. But the beast is hidden, not in shadow, but it's hidden in water. You can't see it approach. You can't see it sneak up on you. Obviously, people couldn't hear the cello music playing that indicated its approach. Because I think if they could...
They'd be like, what is that?
I don't know, but bad things happen when it plays. Let's get out.
Remember when Billy got eaten? That sounds like the music.
It's the same music that was playing. So, like I said, we watched that, but it always frustrated me that when it came to the gory scenes, that she'd either put her hand over my eyes or she'd get in front of me because she didn't want to watch it either. You know, it was a bit frustrating, and that's not the most fondest of memories when it comes to horror movies. That being the case, you know, in the 80s, I always had a lot of horror movies described to me by friends. You know, you always had that kid in school who had the more lenient parents who always kept in school bragging, I went and saw Halloween, and it's like, what was it like? Tell me about it. So that was my experience of horror movies in the 80s.
My mom was a huge fan of horror movies, and I was that kid that my mom would have let me watch it because that's just what she did. If the movie was on, you got to watch the movie. She was watching it, you were watching it. So I saw a lot of scary movies just on TV in the house. So that does kind of make it even more personal because it's in your house.
Yeah, that's the funny thing is that, you know, you watched a lot of the horror movies in your home. Like I said, at that age, I wasn't really watching any of them at home. And I really didn't go to the theater to watch a whole lot of them. A little tiny memory I had is when I walked by a movie theater where The Thing was playing. I remember being scared looking in this theater that wasn't open yet for the day. So looking through the window, it was dark in there, and I'm thinking, ooh, The Thing might be in there or something. You know, it's these unreasonable fears that you have. But finally, you know, you come to the 90s when I'm an adult. I graduated high school in 1990. I'm an adult. I'm on my own. This is where my love for horror movies, I guess you can say, blossomed. And I remember the movie that really kind of got that ball rolling. It's not necessarily like my first horror movie. It's not the one that stands out the most. But it's definitely a standout. It was the Hellraiser franchise.
Yeah, I was never a big fan of that. I knew it existed, and I knew it was in the theaters, but I've never been a big fan of horror movies in general, so I really did avoid those like the plague.
Yeah, and you know, Hellraiser is definitely one of those ones that it's like, I guess you can say it's an acquired taste because it's under the subgenre of they call it body horror, and I guess it's just, you know, the mutilation and torture porn type thing, you know, because I mean the whole thing was about creatures from hell that lived with a ritualistic pain about them, you know, Pinhead being the most iconic.
Right.
But so yeah, there was that. Of course, in reality, I found them. I remember at the time in the Navy, I found the Museum of Death.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that was seeing, you know, real life horror. So there was always that kind of mixing of reality and fantasy.
I think that's part of what makes horror movies more attractive to people, more enticing, is because we see the horror that people do to each other. Jeffrey Dahmer, you know, Charles Manson, you know, serial killers feature heavily in horror movies because they exist. And generally, in a movie, you have an hour and a half to 2 hours to tell a story where 6 to 7 people get murdered. It's kind of a controlled way to maybe experience a little bit of that primal fear of being chased by someone like that.
Yeah, a reasonable person might ask, is like, well, why would you want to experience, you know, running from a serial killer or being eaten alive by some weird alien creature or something like that, you know? And it's like,
or a shark in the ocean.
Or a shark in the ocean and everything. But yeah, I think you say it taps into those primal emotions. For me, and I know you might have a differing opinion of this, but I mean, for me, you know, it's like a roller coaster ride. You know, you're scared at first when you get strapped into that thing and you go through these turns like, you know, but when you get off, you're like, I'm gonna do it again, you know?
I agree with you that it is a roller coaster. I don't know that I would use that analogy with horror movies because, again, my personal tastes, they're not my cup of tea, if you will. I know, real quick, Well, actually, not real quick. It'll take a second or a minute or two. But I grew up in the 70s as well. And I remember my mom loved horror movies so much that we would go on a Friday or a Saturday night every now and again to the drive-in theater. And for those of you that don't know, drive-in theaters, when you take your car and you drive and you sit in a parking lot and watch a movie on a big screen. And at the time, they didn't
Oh, no,
transmit.
no. I interrupt. It wasn't a big screen. It was a ginormous screen.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It was ginormous. And at the time, they didn't transmit the FM radio in FM station into your car. You had a little tinny speaker that sat on a pole with a cord on it, and you rolled your window down and hung that inside the car, and that was how you heard the movie. Well, they would do double features, so the first one was usually some maybe sci-fi movie or something that we wanted to go see, or something that
relatively innocuous.
right. And then the second movie was usually a horror movie because my mother loved those. So I remember seeing The Omen, a movie called, I think it was called Legacy. We were supposed to be asleep in the back seat, my brother and I, and we would peek our heads up over the back of the car seat and occasionally look at the scary movie because you'd hear the music and you know that was something going on, somebody was being chased or something. And it just scared the pants off of me. I mean, I never really slept well in the back seat of the car because there was always that scary crap going on. And then as I got older, we got HBO or whatever the movie channel was in my hometown at the time. And all of the Halloween movies came out, and my mom would watch those. I remember watching Friday the 13th. There was a marathon on television, and I think there was, well, a marathon of the 3 movies I think that existed at the time. But my mom would just sit there and watch those back to back to back, with the lights off in the house, and it was dark, and she would just sit there and watch those, and they just scared the crap out of me. I've never been a huge fan. I know it's just a movie, and I know you hate it when people say that, but in this particular case, that's how I had to rationalize this and talk myself down. I'm much better about it now.
Yeah, I guess that's just that people process fear differently. It's like people consider jumping out of an airplane fun, and other people think that's just stupid. It's on different ends of the spectrum. I guess you and I are good examples of that.
Yeah.
I've absolutely come to really love him. And like I said, come the 90s, and it's like, yeah, I had that blossoming. And it's, for me, I had to do a lot of catching up. I don't know if you want to call it like a renaissance of appreciation, but I really had to look back and say that, Jason Voorhees and the Friday the 13th franchise was more than just a punchline. Because in the 80s, it was a punchline because there were so many sequels, and everyone thought, oh, another one? God, that's so stupid. How many ways can you kill somebody and still be entertaining and everything? But looking back, campy as they are, I consider them kind of classics now. The same can be said for Halloween. There were a number of sequels for that. But like I said, just the revisiting of all these classics was just more of the blossoming and the fascination. I never really could put my finger on it. Am I really a secret sociopath or psychopath that enjoys to see people suffering? Well, or can I relate to it in a sense or something?
That goes to that meme that goes out every now and again. You usually see it around Halloween time, where you're old when you start to relate more to the serial killer than the teenage kids that are running scared.
Yeah, that's classic. I love that too. Being our age, I can really appreciate that.
Damn kids, get off my lawn! I think the thing about watching horror movies is not so much that you're a closet sociopath or anything like that. It explores that primal emotion of fear, like I'd said earlier. So if you live your life day to day in the safety and comfort of the technological world that we live in, how often are you confronted with fear? I mean, real primal fight or flight, oh my god, I'm gonna die, fear. Occasionally you have a reaction if you almost hit somebody with your car or someone almost hits you, but most of the time you just have that safe feeling of, I'm in my car, I'm going to work, I'm safe at work, I'm going home, I'm safe at home. So to watch a horror movie, you're confronting the fear, or at least observing the fear that people have, and they're in their safe places, or the unfamiliar, encountering the unfamiliar, because we don't generally tend to do that. Especially, and I know it's a stereotype, but at our age, going to work, coming home, and then going to the short list of places that you regularly go to. I know that's what I do, and I will drive my daughters down, or my daughter, my youngest now, because Cassidy can drive, but I'll take her down to Taekwondo, and then I'll drive home and make dinner, and then I'll plop down in front of the TV, maybe edit the podcast, and it's kind of routine. So watching a horror movie gets you out of that and really explores base emotions. Just my opinion.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that's probably a shared opinion, especially between you and me, because I think that's exactly it. Yeah, we live in regular mediocrity. Most of us don't do incredibly astounding things, unless we make something astounding. It's like, oh, I love my job and it's great. It's safe, it's familiar. But if said, hey man, see that old abandoned insane asylum over there? Why don't you go spend the night in there? Most of us would be like, no.
No, I got a home to go to.
No, I'll go watch a movie about it as close as I'll get to that.
Mm-hmm. No, I've seen what happens in there. I saw like 6 movies about that.
Yeah, there's quite an abundance. If you've only seen 6, there's quite an abundance of those.
And the tone of voice that I'm using always reminds me of that whole, I know what happens in there. The old Eddie Murphy routine about white people watching horror movies and then black people watching horror movies, or black people in horror movies. And he specifically talks about the Amityville Horror. And it's like, white people walking, oh, this is a beautiful house. I love it. There's a chandelier and everything's beautiful. It's like, get out. Oh, but this is so beautiful. We should just stay. Black people walking in is like, oh, look at that. This is a lovely house. The stairs is beautiful. Get out. Too bad we can't be staying. And the movie's over. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
I actually quote that so many times. And my wife loves it too. She loves it when she says like, "Get out! Too bad we can't stay." But that's the lovely part. It's like when we watch horror movies. It's just kind of the side note on that. We're always those what do they call the people who watch football games but seem to know everything about it? The couch.
Oh, the armchair quarterbacks and stuff? Or?
Armchair quarterbacks, yeah. When we're watching horror movies, we are suddenly armchair survivalists. I wouldn't go in there, or I'd hack his head off, or I'd do this. Ain't no way that guy would sneak up on me like that. I'm like, bitch, that's going to happen to you if you out there in the woods by yourself.
Well, and the other thing is I've played some D&D and role-playing games in my life, and one of the first most basic things you learn in role-playing games is never split up the party. And it always happens like, oh, we're just going to go over here and look for some water. Okay. Do you want some help? No, we'll be fine by ourselves.
Okay, Fred and Daphne.
Well, all right.
No, but that's the thing. You say in D&D don't split up the party. I play video games, and especially when you're playing horror survival, and you're thinking, I don't want to split up the team, or I don't want to go in there. But video games have this thing, is like, man, no choice, man. You gotta go in there. You gotta split. Because your friend is going over there, whether you like it or not.
So, where are you going? Where's who going? Wrong movie, anyway.
Anyways, so... To kind of get back, like I said, the renaissance of appreciation, I really started to discover movies that I hadn't seen while in theaters. And earlier I mentioned The Thing. I absolutely love The Thing. And it's definitely one movie that features high.
And you are talking about the remake.
Yeah, the 1980s version by John Carpenter. That's what I was going to say. These days, people really lament about horror movie remakes, how they're mostly bad. Which, okay, an argument can be made. I enjoyed a few of them. The remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not to say that Tobe Hooper's version was bad. And by the way, Tobe Hooper recently passed. So condolences. Or that John Carpenter's version of Halloween was bad in comparison to Rob Zombie's. I enjoy both of them.
Yeah, I've seen both too. Again, one of the few horror movies that I've actually seen, the original and the remake. And I didn't think the Rob Zombie version was horrible. It was different.
It was different. I think that's what a lot of people don't like, is it different. They think, remakes should be similar in some sense. But it's not always the case, A lot of times you really got to judge these movies on their merits. Just to mention another good standout remake, and I've seen both, The Hills Have Eyes. I actually really enjoyed the remake.
I didn't know that was a remake.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there was a 1970s version. Which, this is the funny thing I just got to mention. When the remake of Texas Chainsaw, when you watch the 70s version, it looks very 70s.
Mm-hmm.
The fashion, the way the people look. The new version, where they said it took place in 1970-something, they did not look very 70s at all.
Why? Those didn't exist in the 70s. Why are you wearing those?
Yeah, I wasn't convinced about that. But letting that go, I said the rest of the movie was pretty cool.
Okay.
But going back to The Thing, yeah, that was a remake. And interesting bit of trivia is that, it was a remake from the 1950s version, which they called The Thing from Another World, which was based on a book called Who Goes There. A lot of people don't know that. It's
I didn't.
Fans, like me, will know it. But it was a book about an alien shapeshifter and the associated paranoia that goes along with dealing with such a creature. And the author was inspired to write that because his mother was a twin, and his mother and his aunt would often switch places, and he never knew exactly who he was talking to, and that kind of freaked him out, I guess, and everything. I guess, I don't know if you...
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you say cool, some people would say very cruel.
Well, it's that, too.
Yeah, but when the 50s version was made, they liked the idea, but they just didn't have the technology to make a creature that did that.
Mm-hmm.
So they did what they did, and it was still a good movie. It's a classic when it comes to old sci-fi horror from the 50s. But John Carpenter's was more true to the book, more true to the idea of a shape-shifting alien and the fear, and just everything about it. Watching the practical effects, and it was in the day before CGI. So all the effects of it changing was either the latex and the mechanics and the actual ooze and goo and everything. It was...
I gotta say, that's speaking to practical effects, there's nothing better than a good practical effect. CGI, until they start creating real people and I can't tell the difference, CGI will never do that justice. I mean, it touches it, but it's practical effects with CGI enhancements maybe, but yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and it's like, I understand. I saw like a commentary about CGI blood.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's understandable why they use it, and not just horror movies, but I mean action movies, bullet strikes and everything. And yeah, it's so much cheaper. I get it. Okay, movies about making money, not necessarily just the art. And CGI blood is so much cheaper than using the gallons of fake blood that after a take you have to clean up, reset, move on. I get it, but I agree with you. It'll never do it justice. And to talk about practical effects, another great movie that used practical effects was the remake of The Fly, which again, not to say that the 50s version with starring Vincent Price was bad, the one with Jeff Goldblum and Gina Davis was really good, and where you got to see his whole transformation.
But the 50s version of The Fly, and I've seen that, is good for its time because it really did do something that no other movie had done before. And the ending was much different than the ending of the Jeff Goldblum movie. It was so eerie, and it was just kind of one of those not reach out and touch you kind of horrors, but it was one of those nightmare horrors. And tell me if I'm remembering this correctly, but at the end of the movie, he's a fly with a human head and a human arm, and he's trapped in a spider web, and the spider's coming to get him. And that's just scary in and of itself, because that's just something you could never get yourself out of, and it's something that you've obviously never had to think about getting out of. So there's a reason they made a remake of it, was because it struck a chord with somebody and they thought that it was worth revisiting.
Yeah, that's all I can say is agreed on that. Like you said, yeah, struck a chord. I think, though, with the 1980s remake of The Fly with Jeff Goldblum, I don't know what it was trying to tap into, but it definitely stuck with audiences about watching this man transform little step by step from human to fly. I would only guess that, just watching somebody lose their humanity in a sense, and that in a sense is kind of a horrific thing to experience.
I think that was an integral part of the story.
Yeah, I would say so. I don't know if I can say that it was a psychological horror, but that definitely, it's again a movie that really kind of gets in your head and scares you by making you fill in the blanks. That to me is a much more intense horror movie. Now, again, I don't know if The Fly can be considered a psychological horror, but it definitely got in your head thinking like, how would I deal with this? And
the interesting thing is, like you had said, it talks about the loss of humanity and becoming something else. So when we say this is a horror movie, I mean, really, how many people does he kill? 2, maybe 3 at the most? Not that that's a requirement for a horror movie, but it's the presence, it's the change, and what you see him going through, and how Gina Davis's character reacts, and how he surrenders himself to that marvelous feeling, how good this is, how great something feels when it first happens, and then as he slowly starts to devolve or mutate, he becomes more and more concerned and says, holy crap, what the hell is going on here? It speaks to people changing in the first place and becoming something they don't recognize.
That's an interesting commentary. I don't think I've ever heard anybody mention it that way, but I like that. I'll have to make me watch that again. Hopefully, maybe one day we'll review it, go deeper into it.
Yeah.
So, kind of just to move along, I had mentioned, psychological horror movies. Like you said, people dying left and right, not necessarily a criteria to making a good horror movie. But the genre that came out, and it wasn't a new genre, but it was new to me, and it started for me, again, it wasn't the first, but it was the one that really made me take notice of the found footage genre, and that was the Blair Witch Project. And I started to really get into the found footage, the psychological, because then I really started to learn that horror movies, and just horror in general, and I have to bring an honorable mention of the video game Silent Hill 2, because it was about that time when I got into, video games and everything, and I played Silent Hill 2. Yeah, these were things that really got in your head, and it really made you fill in the blanks, and I think that's where horror movies really excel, because the human brain, man, you could be the most sane person in the world, but when you don't have all the information and it's something that's scary, man, you will think of the worst possible scenarios or...
No, your mind fills in the blanks. That's what it does.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I when analyzing the Blair Witch, I mean, the scenes where they're in the woods, it's nighttime, and they're hearing these sounds just beyond the arc of their flashlights. And they're like, hello? Is anybody out there? And the sound that they give you in the movie is like breaking branches or rustling leaves and everything. And, of course, you're thinking it's like, is that the Blair Witch? Is that a bunch of devil worshippers, and everything? When in actuality, it's probably just Bambi just walking through the woods. It's like, what are these people yelling at?
Have you seen my mom? Oh, too soon?
No, maybe. So that really kind of put the hook in me. And then the other standout of that genre was the Paranormal Activity movies, most notably the first one.
Yeah, I didn't see any of those.
You didn't see those?
No.
I mean, yeah, the first one, it literally scared the crap out of me.
Literally?
Well,
literally?
Well, not in the sense that I defecated on myself,
We're
but
gonna need
it was...
clean up on row 4, sheet 8. Clean up on row 4, sheet 8.
It didn't require cleanup. It was more of like it was the scene where they're in bed and they hear it sounds like somebody stomping through the halls, and then they hear a crash. When that sound came out, I was like, oh, it's like so yeah, it made me fart. So
Thanks for sharing.
Isn't that lovely? So movie trivia there. What movie made Dan fart? But like I said, it wasn't. Is that psychological horror? It didn't necessarily have to be a found footage movie, because then I really started enjoying movies like Insidious and The Conjuring and Sinister, which they're from the same producers as Paranormal Activity. I think that's why I kind of really gravitated towards them. Yeah, and it's a lot of it is mostly jump scares, but a lot of them are done well enough. There is that slow build up and that psychological thing, like, okay, you heard a noise. What was it? And, in this movie, oh, it's the ghost or it's the demon or whatever,
Yeah.
But, again, your mind is filling in the blanks.
Since you said it's from the same producers, I wanted to ask, do you have a favorite producer or director that does horror movies, or is it just sort of the appreciation of all of them individually?
Yeah, I really can't say that I have a favorite producer of horror. Some directors that I like their horror movies. Yeah, I guess the only one I can really think of that really only did horror, and he also recently passed away, so condolences, was George Romero. He did the Night of the Living Dead and all his subsequent sequels. I do enjoy his version of zombies. If it wasn't for him, we wouldn't have The Walking Dead.
Okay.
And I know this is a very controversial subject when it comes to zombies and everything, but I'm of the school of thought, to hell with the fast zombies. That's not how zombies are. They don't run. You can't have more than what you died with, And, that's the thing, it's like that was the deception that, you think these zombies are slow and stupid and everything, that you could just easily walk away from them. But, man, they really get you when they get in hordes, when they get in numbers. That's always the paradox.
Well, they're the Pepe Le Pew of the monster industry.
Yeah. And then when you think you can just hole up in a house, you think, oh, I'm going to be safe. No. Max Brooks, who wrote World War Z, and I'm talking the book, not the movie, because I'm formally boycotting the movie, because they used the title, but it was nothing like the book. And it was these fast, stupid-ass zombies that were like based on bacteria infection or whatever. Screw that.
Tell us how you really feel, Dan.
Oh, no, I feel very strongly about that. But the book, it had a phrase, and there's no such thing as safe, only safer. That was always the thing when you're dealing with zombies, you know. You think, oh, I'm just going to hole up in this house or this little fortress, and yeah, 1, 2, even a dozen, you're fine. But when they start really gathering and you get this horde pushing on the door, that door's going to collapse, man, and that's it, you're toast.
Oh, yeah.
But kind of going back to your original question, I mean, Ridley Scott, when he did Alien,
Mm-hmm.
that is one of my absolute favorite sci-fi horror movies.
Yeah, and Alien was so good because it was one of the first, I think, if I recall correctly, it was one of the first crossover genres where it was sci-fi and horror.
Yeah, I don't know if I could say it was the first, but it definitely stood out as one of the pioneers.
One of the landmark ones, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, as far as sci-fi goes, it was one of the first, again, if not the absolute first, to actually portray sci-fi technology as, I believe the term they use is used technology.
Right. Like it had been around for a minute. It was, well-worn.
Yeah, because if you look at 2001 Space Odyssey, everything's so pristine, fresh out of the box and clean and everything. But then come along Alien and Star Wars, you got the Millennium Falcon. What a hunk of junk. It's like his pickup that he's been keeping together with old parts found in the junkyard.
Bubblegum and baling wire.
But, yeah, to say how much Alien stands out for me, kind of referencing video games again, I played this game called Alien Isolation. And it was kind of the direct sequel to Alien. It was probably the first good video game based on the Alien franchise, and it was so good that I was only able to play it for 10 to 20 minutes at a time because I really needed to breathe.
Or you would poop your pants?
Or, well, maybe worse, You basically, no matter how many weapons you had or what sort of weapons you had, you could not defeat this alien. So the only thing to get through this game was to hide, sneak around it, accomplish your tasks, and get out. That's basically it. If it saw you, you couldn't run because that thing ran faster than you. At one point, my old career as a paramedic, I actually hooked up myself to a heart monitor and saw that, my heart rate went from a nice comfortable 80-something to about 120 during some scenes.
Nice.
So, yeah, I actually got to see what that does to me. But, there's Stanley Kubrick, The Shining. But other than that, the standouts, as far as what kind of horror they are and who directed them, they're all varied.
What about authors? I think as of this recording, Stephen King's It just broke 140 million over the weekend.
Oddly enough, I enjoy some of his movies. I have some of his movies, but I never really got into his books. Which is a really weird thing. So I really can't say that I've been a Stephen King fan. I like his politics as of late, but other than that, yeah, I've never really paid attention to him. But as far as authors are concerned, it's Clive Barker, definitely.
Okay.
I have read his books. Like, I saw Hellraiser first, but then when the novella that it was based on was called The Hellbound Heart, and I saw that was very well written, and so I started reading a bunch of his other stuff. He definitely stands out as an author that I like. So, other standout movies, Surprise movie that I like, and it's one of those movies that it's like, what would I do in this situation, is the Purge franchise.
Okay, I've seen Purge Election Year. I'd sat through part of the first one, but I was on deployment, so it was just sort of in and out, and I never really got into that franchise.
Yeah, like I said, I rented it on Amazon streaming, thinking, okay, this looks like this might be a fun movie, let's check it out. I watched it with the wife, and man, we just ended up loving it. So every time they talk about a sequel, which as of this recording, the number 4 sequel will be coming out early next year, I think. Yeah, and we're really looking forward to it.
Well, good.
Another movie, psychological, The Strangers. I don't know if you've ever seen that one.
No, I don't recall.
That's one of those movies, do not watch alone, or do not watch in a group less than 50. It was a home invasion type horror movie. I think it was Liv Tyler was the main star. Her and her, I don't know if it was her boyfriend or her husband, I forget. They're in this house trying to reconcile their relationship, but they get home invaded by 3 very creepy people. And that's the thing, the actual violence doesn't really happen until the third act. But the first 2 is just this kind of this psychological torture of standing in the corner or looking at them through the window or stuff, like just totally freaking them out. Definitely not a movie you want to watch alone at home at night.
Okay.
Or maybe it is. Maybe you want.
Or maybe you do. Maybe
yeah.
You're into that sort of thing.
The Descent. There's another movie that I really enjoy, and mostly because the cast is all women.
I have seen that one. That's where they go into the cave and
Yeah.
there's the mutant cave dweller things or whatever they are.
Yeah, the cavemen who never left the cave and evolved into these bat-like, they're man bats.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thing I loved about it is like, yeah, these women, they're not damsels in distress. They fight back, and I think that was most enjoyable. Rob Zombie films, I think there's kind of to answer your question, there's a director. I consistently like his movies. House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, his version of Halloween. Those kind of stood out. Kind of really reaching back. My brother loved this movie, and later on, because of that, I started to really like it. It was American Werewolf in London, which, again, we're talking about practical effects. Man, that transformation, man, to me, that's the best. I have yet to see a movie match that.
Yeah, my mom liked An American Werewolf in London as well. Not so much An American Werewolf in Paris.
Yeah, that one, yeah, had some CGI and wasn't as good. It did not do anything for me. But talk about British werewolves, though. Well, it was American Werewolf in London, but a werewolf movie in English countryside is a movie called Dog Soldiers. Not a very well-known movie, but it was about English soldiers doing maneuvers out in these isolated woods and run into a pack of werewolves. Yeah. You can imagine where that goes.
Yeah, I could see that going badly.
And, another good standout, and like you said, it just came out, so everyone's talking about scary clowns. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Have you seen that one?
Not in 1,000 years or more. I have seen it, I just haven't seen it in forever. And I don't think it's something that generally tends to play on the television. I think you have to go out of your way to go find that one.
Yeah, maybe you might see a special, well, especially nowadays. I mean, there might be a special showing on one of these channels. There's a horror channel out that's right now. But I don't subscribe to it because I got all the horror movies I want.
Sci-fi does science fiction and horror, but I don't know if there's a specific horror movie channel. I'm not going to watch it anyway, so I don't care.
Yeah. So, again, the list is long. I have literally hundreds of horror movies that I could talk about. Hopefully, some of the ones that I got on the random list, we can go more in depth and everything. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to be, a lot of listeners are going to say, well, you didn't mention this, you didn't mention that. And it's like, well, it's because of the time constraint and everything. But, hey,
Well, yeah, and that's usually one of those things where, you get done and you think 20 minutes later, like, crap, I should have mentioned that. Or I should have mentioned that.
Yeah, exactly. But to really kind of bring this home, I'm going to mention just a small handful of movies that really stuck with me because of my childhood, my development. And again, we mentioned one already. It was Amityville Horror. If you watch it nowadays, the original 1970-something version with, was it one of the Brolin brothers? I don't think it was Josh Brolin, but I think it was his brother. One of the Brolins.
James
Brolin? Okay. Anyways, yeah, it's dated. Some of the effects are, they're kind of like, it doesn't really scare me anymore. But I really put myself back into my childhood and I relive the fears that I had. So I think that's why that stands out. And again, like I said, people were saying this was a true story. So there was that, which brings to the second one that I talk about is The Entity. And that's a fairly little known movie, but that one was supposedly based on a true story about a woman who was continuously sexually assaulted by some unseen spirit or demon.
Or entity.
Became a very famous paranormal investigation case long before these Ghost Hunter TV shows came out and everything. And if you ever look up the associated case with that, you see some interesting ghost photography. Is it real or is it fake? Because they had some pretty interesting stories. And of course, among the last of those, Poltergeist.
Poltergeist.
Yeah, with the scary-ass clown, toy, whatever. It's like, why would the kid even own that if that's scared of him? It'd be like, Mom...
It just looked creepy in the first place.
Yeah,
maybe it was a family heirloom?
If Mom got that for me, I'd be like, no. You put that in
your
your room.
We don't need this.
Put that in your room.
The cool thing about Poltergeist, because I know, again, on the list of movies that my mother loved was Poltergeist. So we watched that movie over and over and over again. And there were two scenes that on the first watch, one of them scared the bejesus out of me. And after a while, I sort of got to that, special effects sort of, that's neat the way they did that, so it doesn't really bother me anymore. But it still kind of does, was when the guy starts ripping off his face.
Oh, yeah.
And all of his flesh just falls into the bathroom sink and whatnot. And the other scene that scared the pants off of me was during the lightning storm when the lightning flashes and the tree outside the kid's window is outlined and the shadow is thrown, and it just looks eerie. It's got that weird light dark contrast. And then when the tree breaks into the room and grabs him, scared the crap out of me.
Oh,
Yeah, the other stuff was kind of over the top special effect-y type stuff, and not in a bad way. I'm just saying that it was all stuff you're like, oh, hey, there's a lot of stuff happening. But the tree, I mean, somebody stuck a tree branch through a window and played with that and grabbed him, and that one got to me.
Yeah, surprisingly though, to me, it's the subtle stuff that really spooks me in that movie. Just when they're sitting at the dinner table talking about it, and then a teacup just goes across the table. It's just like,
yep. I'm sorry. If my kid slid 20 feet across the floor unassisted, I would have left the first time it happened. You got 5 feet. You're like, yeah, we got to go.
Too bad we can't stay.
Yeah, no, baby, too bad we can't stay.
But, one last one I feel I have to mention, though. And it kind of goes with one of my primal fears of being eaten alive. I don't know where this comes from. I was never under threat of being eaten alive, but it's definitely something that I fear is the blob. Man, because looking back, like I said, when I was scared at Dracula, it's like, oh, I could close the door and lock it. I could hide in the blanket. I could even hold up a cross and ward him away. And ain't nothing. The blob just oozed under the door and got you.
Yeah, and again, going back to the Pepe Le Pew approach to monsters, the blob moved at about 3 feet per year, maybe a little faster than that, and you couldn't get away.
Yeah, then you deserve to get eaten.
And are you talking about the 50s version or the remake?
A little bit of both.
Ah.
The remake just showed the digestion a little bit more detailed and just really kind of brought that fear home.
I remember going to see that one in the theater. But it's funny that you mentioned the blob in an episode where we're merging horror and musicals, because in one of my favorite musicals, Grease, the movie that they go see at the drive-in in the middle of Grease is the 50s version of the blob.
Outstanding. No, I don't remember that, but that's cool.
So Danny Zuko is in the car. He's trying to grease up his ring to take it off his finger to give it to Sandy. And he makes a move on her at the drive-in, as one was wont to do in the 50s, or at least the stereotype goes. And they're watching the blob, and it was a scary moment, and he puts his arm around her and grabs her in an inappropriate place. And at a scary part in the movie, so that she jumps to him, she reacts badly, and then she throws the ring back at him, slams his junk in the door, and then he goes up to the swing set that existed at the drive-in at the time so that the kids would have something to do, and he starts singing a song, because, that's what you do in musicals. You bust out in song to express your emotions at the time. In fact, Grease, as I've already said, one of my favorite musicals. My mom, who liked horror movies, also loved musicals, or at the very least, she loved Grease. And I remember when I was a kid, we watched it, I think, 13 times one summer because we had it on video cassette. So I have known the songs to Grease by heart since probably about the mid-'80s when we watched it over and over and over again. And I probably knew them before that. I have always had a fascination with musicals because no one breaks out in song in real life. Unless you're on Candid Camera or that Howie Mandel Flash Mob show or something like that. It just doesn't happen. So in the same way that horror movies will take you to a place where you get to experience an emotion that you don't feel all the time, musicals will put you in a place where you get to express an emotion in a way that you don't all the time. So that's kind of what I like about musicals, is it does push that emotion out into your face, and you can listen to the music later and it brings you right back to the movie, if it's a particularly good musical. So it really does bring all that stuff around, and that's why I like musicals. I like musicals where they just sing, but I also like musicals where they dance, because it kind of gives it its own energy, and you feel the enthusiasm as they're dancing on the stage. So I don't know. My mom got me into musicals, and I've always kind of liked them.
My mother was also into musicals. Her favorites were some of the older ones that you saw as early, I guess, as the 30s, all the way through the 50s. She watched musicals with Fred Astaire dancing.
Oh, yep.
They did their song and dance and everything. I don't think she had anything as old, having Al Jolson or anything. I don't think she had anything as old as that.
Okay.
But
Well,
South Pacific.
we have that. In fact, that's Christie's favorite musical is South Pacific.
Mm,
Not that she runs around singing "I'm gonna wash that man right
yeah.
out of my hair," but that's her favorite musical. We have The Sound of Music. We go back to the 50s for some, but a lot of those were the 60s because they were in color and everything. We watch White Christmas every year with Bing Crosby and Danny F and K, as Chevy Chase referred to them in the Christmas Vacation movie, and that's again one of Christie's favorite movies. But that's a different kind of musical because part of it is singing for the emotion, and part of it is singing because they're actual singers and they're on a stage doing a thing. So there are different, I don't want to say subgenres of musicals because I don't really know. I don't research musicals to say this is this type, this is that type. I really am the kind of person that just knows what I like in a musical, or at least when I see a musical, I go, okay, I like that. I didn't care for a great deal the movie version of Les Miserables, and I'm not a huge theater goer. So it hasn't occurred to me to go see someone else do it. I did go see The Phantom of the Opera at the theater. Christy likes that as a theater performance, and we went and saw that. And I enjoyed myself.
It's not always easy going to the theater, though. Tickets for those things tend to be real spendy, don't they?
Yeah, I think we paid a good amount of money, but it was our anniversary, so it was it was worth it.
Yeah, that's,
Not that it wouldn't have been worth it anyway, but it was the special occasion, so we went and saw that.
yeah. Well, when you're like us who have modest budgets, yeah, you kind of have to have an occasion, because going there on a regular basis.
It's a thing. Let's go.
Season tickets for theater, not something that we do on a normal basis. Not that we don't want to,
No.
we just,
We went and saw the movie version too, and that wasn't bad. I mean, I like the Phantom of the Opera, but again, I'm not a huge Broadway musical fan. I'm not going to go to New York to see The Lion King. I wouldn't mind seeing Hamilton, but apparently you have to buy tickets for next millennium, this millennium, so I don't know that I'm going to be able to see that. I've heard it's quite good.
until somebody makes a movie version.
Exactly. And that's more my speed, and I can watch that over and over and over again and learn the songs and learn the bits and the lines and see the characters interact and get a little bit more personally involved with the movie. I know that there is a stereotype associated with people who like musicals, and to that I say, kiss my ass. I don't care. I like what I like.
Well, I get that, because there was always that stereotype of people who like horror movies. The lonely, sociopathic, doesn't get along well with others type of kid. So he can't be sociable, so he watches horror movies, and eventually he'll grow up to be a serial killer.
Yeah, or maybe he just wants to sing.
Yeah, or do both.
Yes. Well, and they're singing horror movies.
Yeah, true. Which, that's the funny thing, is that my collection is not completely bereft of musicals. And those crossovers, the titles that come to mind right now is I have a little film called Repo, the Genetic Opera, which is kind of a horror film type story. Basically, it's a company finances organ transplants, and if you don't make your payments, the Repo Man comes and takes them back in the most horrific manner possible.
Well, it's not like they put you in surgery. Like, no, we're just going to take that now.
I'm taking
Thanks.
that now. The other one that comes to mind, it's like Sweeney Todd, Tim Burton's, another type of horrific story that's a musical. So yeah, there's some good crossover. We find some common ground.
Yeah, well, I mean, everybody wants to sing.
But, yeah. So my question to you, obviously you've explained how musicals wound up heavily on your shelf. Is there like a particular type that you see that you gravitate more towards? Something like Grease, where it's just kind of a fun musical, or something where it's like a real serious story that they just put to music, or something more like the 30s, where it's just like singing and dancing was just the form of entertainment that everybody liked.
I'm more inclined to enjoy something with a story. I mean, Grease had a story, but it was a lot of fun and there was a lot of hijinks involved. But one of my favorite musicals is Moulin Rouge.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a story interwoven through that. That one's just different in a way that a lot of other musicals aren't. It's very, I think, ostentatious is the right word. It's sort of over the top.
Baz Luhrmann is regularly over the top. His level of fanfare is beyond anybody else that I can really think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, he definitely likes a very frenetic screen until it's time for it to not be frenetic. And he wants you to focus on the one thing. In Moulin Rouge, it's very colorful, and then when the story turns dark, the lights go dim, and he's very good with lighting and color. And then there is a point where Nicole Kidman's character is going to sleep with the Duke, and the cast of the show that they're producing does a little Argentinian tango to Roxanne. And it's very powerful because you know what the song's about. The song is about a lady of the night, and when he sings it, it's not the gentle sting voice. It's very gruff and harsh, and it's kind of a Roxanne. It's very guttural, because they're guttural people doing this dance, and the lighting is specifically on them, so it enhances their dance, and it also forces you to focus on just that, so you're not as distracted. So again, it goes to the movie making piece. I really like to be sucked into the song. So let's go back to Grease when Danny's at the drive-in and he's singing his love song to Sandy, that he wants her back, and he realizes that things have changed and he needs to kind of do something, and that's sort of the pivot point in the movie. But the lyric, he goes, "We made a start, now we're apart, there's nothing left for me." And I was going to sing during this, so just letting you know.
I'm not complaining.
But he goes through that whole emotional story of, he basically catches, if you walk into the middle of the movie, he just caught you up to everything that had happened. Like, we were together, now we're not, now I'm sad, now I need to do something to get us back together. Or, because you're the one that I want. Oh wait, that's at the end of the movie. So, it's a good, fun, hijinks sort of musical, whereas Moulin Rouge has a little bit more seriousness to it. Chicago has that very intense piece to it, but it's also got the playful bits. And one of the things that I also like about musicals in a movie format is you can get people to sing in a movie musical that you don't normally think of as singers. Like Renee Zellweger in Chicago, not a particularly great singer, but that was kind of part of the story. She got to be famous at the end of the movie because of what she did, and then who she teamed up with Catherine Zeta-Jones because they had a shtick, but she wasn't particularly great. She wasn't stand out, otherwise she would have already had a job.
Yeah.
So, but go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to take your word for on that because I'm kind of protesting Chicago as well.
Oh, for the love of God. Why are you boycotting Chicago?
Because it won the Oscar for Best Picture over Gangs of New York. Really?
No.
Really? I know there's a listener out there who agrees with me.
Maybe somewhere. I don't know.
Anyways, you were saying, I'm sorry.
But like Richard Gere, you don't think Richard Gere singing when you think of Richard Gere as an actor. You don't think of John C. Reilly singing, and he was in that movie. John C. Reilly, who usually plays a goofball, or at least a quasi-goofball. I mean, in was it the Dewey Cox story, when he was in Talladega Nights, when he was in
Step Brothers.
Step Brothers, that was exactly what I was trying to think of. He's a goofy dude.
Yeah.
You don't think of him as being, someone who could sing a song. And his song in the movie, Mr. Cellophane, is pretty well performed. And again, it doesn't have to be great because he's supposed to be a regular guy singing a song, but it's a good performance. Now, Queen Latifah, you expect her to sing because that's what she did. So, you see a lot of things in musicals that you don't expect to see. Clint Eastwood, James Coburn, or was it James Coburn or Lee Marvin? Now I've forgotten. In Paint Your Wagon. Not two people you think of, particularly in that time frame, in a musical. But yet, there they were.
Yeah.
They weren't good, but what the hell?
It's funny you mentioned that too, because one I mentioned earlier, Repo, it has Paul Sorvino and Anthony Stewart Head of Buffy the Vampire Slayer fame.
Again, had a musical episode.
Yeah, that had a musical episode as well. But, again, these are, like you're saying, these are not people that you associate so much with singing. I mean, they're dramatic actors, but they sing.
That's one of the things that you see in television, too, is, they'll do a musical episode, like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'm a huge fan of comic book properties, so I watch the DC shows and I watch the Marvel shows on television. They might suck, but I'll at least give them a chance. And Supergirl and The Flash, they just recently did a musical crossover episode, and both of the actors are from the television show Glee, which you would think if I like musicals that I would just love the hell out of Glee. Never really got into it. I like the music from it because it's chorus, that sort of thing. It's performance music, but I never really got into the show because I couldn't stand all the little drama-y bits in a serialized thing. But they sang their butts off, and I enjoyed most of the music that I heard come out of that.
Here's my question then. Because like I said, I originally asked about which type of musical featured most heavily in your collection or anything. I guess the question now is what criteria do you use to consider something a musical? Because you mentioned Buffy and Supergirl and The Flash. It's these are not things that are normally musicals or even associated with musicals and everything, but for fun, they made an episode for each where they made it into a musical. They just put whatever story they had for that episode into song and dance. So what criteria do you use to classify a musical? And would you consider that part of your collection as a musical, or would you just consider it, obviously The Flash is just a series that happens to have a musical episode in it. So obviously we're not going to count that. But a movie that just happens to have song and dance, would you consider that a musical?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Most of the Disney animation, except for some of the stuff that came out in the 70s, are musicals. And when I say most of, I mean even, like the 60s. But obviously when they had their resurgence in the 90s with Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and Aladdin, those are all musicals. They count as animated musicals, but they all have songs in there, and they're all songs that the characters sing as opposed to music playing in the background.
Okay.
Because every movie has music.
Yeah.
Whether or not the characters sing the song is what makes it, in my opinion, a musical, and I think I'm pretty spot on that one.
Yeah, I guess by that criteria, then I have a fairly large musical collection because I think I've got just about every. I've almost. That's the thing. I've said before I'm a completist and everything, and I've almost got my Disney collection complete. I think the only classic animated movie that I'm missing is 101 Dalmatians.
Ah, nice. See, you're missing Cruella de Vil. Cruella de Vil. If she doesn't scare you, no evil thing will. Anyway, see? Again, scary things.
But see here, that's the thing now. See, that one, I would kind of be on the fence on that because he, that was just part of the story. He's a songwriter. So, I'm talking about 101 Dalmatians. That character is a songwriter.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider 101 Dalmatians a musical. It's just a song that pops up in there, and I like it.
Yeah, but see that. But I'm just using that as an example. It's again, you have movies like, what's a good one that I can think of? What was the one with Tom Cruise that just recently came out?
Oh, Rock of Ages. I love that movie.
Now, that was about... Okay, well, maybe this isn't a good example, because, that one was about musicians. So, yeah, you can consider that... You can consider that one a musical.
You're damn right I can. Okay. And I can consider it one of the best musicals of all time. Maybe not, but...
Okay. But I think what I'm...
real quick story about that before you jump on that. When I was on my very last deployment in the Navy, Rock of Ages had just come out, I think, on DVD or something like that. And we played that on the television over and over and over again. I think we probably watched it about 75 times on that deployment. And as you know, but for our listeners, when you see a movie on deployment, you don't really see a movie. You see an entire movie over little 5-minute segments that you then have to piece together in your head to go, oh, okay, that happened here, this happened here, and then you put the movie together and go, oh, one day I'm actually going to have to sit and watch this from front to back because something happened, I just don't know what it was. Anyway, you were saying, I'm sorry.
Well, that is considered musical because it was about people who were musicians, but the presentation of their music, it was theatrical in a sense, I guess if the word can be used. But then I'm thinking of a movie that I own. This is Spinal Tap, which is also about musicians. And there were scenes where they're in concert, they're playing their music, everything. Would you, by your personal definition, would you consider that a musical? Or was that just a documentary that just happened to have music in it?
The latter. It was a documentary that happened to have music in it. So at no point did they stop and sing their emotions. They performed on stage, and if they're not singing to express an emotion in the moment, then in my mind it doesn't really classify as a musical.
So you consider it just like a concert flick?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like, no, go ahead.
I was going to say, another part of my collection, which, like I said, I'm not a musical fan per se, but I have like a small grouping of films that are musical as a characteristic, and the recent addition is Metallica's Through the Never, which had a story, and they're using Metallica's music to convey what this individual in the story is going through. But the music they're playing is happening in a concert. The character in question is a roadie for Metallica. He gets sent on an errand.
Okay.
During that errand, he experiences some really surreal and crazy stuff. And as he's experiencing this stuff, in parallel, back at the concert that he just left, Metallica is playing music that just happens to fit with what he's experiencing.
I don't know that I would consider that a musical.
Yeah, because it's not strictly a concert film. Because, I mean, it's like, yeah, I mean, we're watching their concert, but the music they're playing fits the story that is happening elsewhere.
I think that's just a heavily musical thematic movie as opposed to a true musical.
Okay.
Because, again, the key piece is, did he at any point break out into song to say, I'm scared because of what's happening, or I miss my wife, or, my one true love, or whatnot. Because that's the thing about musicals that I think really butts up against horror as an emotional experience. Musicals generally tend to be uplifting, but there's always the dip where the main character or the supporting character has that emotional moment where they realize something happened, or they're sad, and so you start out reasonably happy, then you get sad, and then you're happy at the end again because everything worked out, because that's generally how musicals work.
Have you seen Sweeney Todd?
I haven't. No.
Yeah, that's kind of the paradox there about what you just described.
There are exceptions to every rule, but through the song, you get to experience the emotion, and if we know anything from our caveman days, we are rhythmic people. We are rhythmic beings. We like rhythm. So, well, look at primitive tribes. They have their dances and their music, so we like rhythm. And when you get into a musical, there is rhythm in there, and it sucks into an emotional place that you didn't necessarily know that you had. Again, same thing with horror movies. Horror movies take you to a place where you can experience safely that fear. Musicals give you the opportunity to take the emotions that you normally feel, like love and happiness, and exaggerate them so that you are in a much happier place. It takes happiness and makes it happier. It takes love and makes it lovier. It takes sadness and makes it sadder.
Yeah. Or if you're talking about Klingon opera, it makes you more wow.
Yes, it really emphasizes the honor, and then they kick you off and make you go sing on the Defiant, I believe.
That's one thing I gotta bring up here. And you talked about primitive cultures. One. But the first thought, and I don't know if you heard me kind of chuckling in the background, tell me what movie I'm thinking of, is where Fade made a sound. Wow! 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 The guy took a...
Caveman?
No, guy took a rock, smashed his foot. Wow! Wow!
This is going to be one of those, as soon as you say it, I'm going to know.
History of the World Part 1 with the primitive man. That's like, because when you said caveman, the rhythmic and everything, that's the first thing that popped into my head. It's just that whole orchestra of just smashing rocks into people's feet,
See, Mel Brooks got it.
Yeah, but alongside that, though, the thing I thought of, part of my cultural background, my mom was from Hawaii. She wasn't Hawaiian by genetics. She was more Hawaiian by geography because she just happened to be born there. But she knew the history. She knew the culture. And I look back and, song and dance was a lot of how, because they before didn't really have a written history. Their history was taught through song and dance. And, of course, thinking about that, a lot of Native American cultures, other Polynesian cultures, African cultures, even European cultures, a lot, when they didn't have a written language, a lot of their histories had to be told through song and dance. And of course that segued into Klingons talking about, it's like, after this battle, we're going to write a glorious song about this,
Yeah, it's like Julie Andrews told us in The Sound of Music, And Ewan McGregor also told us in Moulin Rouge, the hills are alive with the sound of music. It's there, the musical rhythms are there. That's right, I'm singing, and I'm doing it at least 3 more times.
Okay.
I got songs in my heart.
Hey, you know what, though? I think people would much rather you sing about talking about musicals than me slashing up somebody talking about horror movies.
Well, they don't know what you're doing on the video call, so.
But something to kind of touch back on horror movies. You're talking about a safe spot, experiencing something in a safe spot, carrying with you. And I mentioned, again, Max Brooks, who wrote World War Z, he mentioned, there's no such thing as safe, only safe.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, when you experience a horror movie, yeah, you say it's in relative safety because you can always say it's just a movie, which, again, bullcrap, because if anybody's ever remember the old 70s version of The Last House on the Left, that was their advertising slogan. Just keep saying to yourself, it's just a movie, it's just a movie. But, the thing about it, though, is that, yeah, you can say it was just a movie, but that movie especially, because of if you've ever seen it, it was a very disturbing movie. Yeah, that stuff sticks with you.
Musicals stick with you too because you sing the songs like 3 years later.
That's what I was going to say is that, you talk about it, it's like, yeah, it takes you a place to feel good, and afterwards you feel good beyond, your movie watching experience. And that's the thing with horror movies, that fear stays with you. Again, after watching Dracula as a kid, I had to go to bed and sleep under the covers with the door locked and everything because I was scared. Best example I can think of is when I was on deployment and we were in Guam. And it was right when Jurassic Park first came out. Now, Jurassic Park, not a horror movie per se, but it had some scary moments. And I don't know if you remember the scene where Nedry experienced the Dilophosaur, that little frilled lizard thing.
Yeah.
The little sound it made. The boo, boo.
Yeah, the soft and friendly.
You think it's friendly, but,
It's like it's a pigeon cooing.
But now you associate it with something deadly and something to be scared of. Well, after we saw that movie, which was a midnight showing, handful of us sailors walking down the streets of Guam. And I don't know if you've ever been to Guam.
I have not.
It's like Hawaii, but a little bit more overgrown, a little less developed. So there's a lot of jungly parts in the middle of the city in Guam. So we're walking through some of these, there's a trail. We feel relatively safe because it's not necessarily a bad neighborhood. But there are birds in Guam that sound like, ooh, ooh. And a bunch of tough guys who just saw Jurassic Park are carrying that fear with us, And yeah, reasonable guys think no, it's not a dinosaur, but we didn't think that. We're just like, keep walking, get the hell out of here. So you think that you're safe, but your brain makes it very unsafe. I just thought I'd mention that.
I laughed in the middle of that, and I do apologize because I wasn't laughing at what you were telling me. For some strange reason, when you were talking about the overgrown jungle and everything, I started picturing a large bear telling you about the bare necessities, and and I could not get that picture out of my head. A group of sailors walking through the forest and a big bear just going, I mean the bare necessities. So you would have known how to survive with ease.
I kind of wonder how we would react to that, thinking it's going to be some dinosaur that's going to eat us, but it's a bear singing at us. And I think I probably would have ran just to say.
It's a bear. I mean, it'll be okay. But, again, deep down inside, we enjoy the thrill of being scared in a way that we know we're not going to get hurt. That's why we like horror movies. Well, why horror movies are a thing. I don't like them. I don't even think I actually have that many horror movies on my shelf. Alien, I'm pretty sure I have that because, well, it's Alien. And I can buy the sci-fi thing. And one of the things that I care for about that one is it is sci-fi. And as much as we think we know everything there is to know about Earth, we don't, by the way. But anyway, we haven't gone out into space as people past the moon. So when you talk about actually going out there and finding out what life is like out there, maybe there is an alien out there. Just like that. We don't know.
No, we barely know anything about our own oceans. And my whole thought is if you want to speculate what aliens out in space would look like, just look at the life that we do know about in the oceans. None of that stuff looks like us.
Ain't that the truth?
That stuff is about as alien as it gets to our scope of knowledge. Yeah, who knows what kind of bizarre things you're going to find out there.
But we have sent music out into space because space is important, as is music. So, yeah, there's a lot of space-themed musicals. Who knew? Anyway. Yeah, so you had discussed a few of your standouts. For me, Grease, obviously, Rock of Ages is just a buttload of fun because of the era that it takes place in. Have you seen it?
Rock of Ages? No.
It's set in Los Angeles around 1984. So all of the music is from my teenage years, and it's a lot of the formative stuff that shaped my personal tastes as I grew up. I like the Disney movies. How can you not come out of seeing Frozen singing Let It Go? Don't know why, but it's a thing. The Aladdin, I Can Show You the World, and the Aladdin piece, I Can Show You the World, and then Robin Williams singing You Ain't Never Had a Friend Like Me. That's just good fun right there. So as to some of my favorite musicals, it's that era of Disney movie. I also like the Disney movies that they put on the Disney Channel. I liked the High School Musical movies. The first one was kind of Grease for this day and age, where you had two conflicting types of people who, outside of their safe space or outside of their normal operating environment, were different people than they were expected to be when they were at school with their peers. So I like that. The Sound of Music. I care a great deal for that one because it tells a story, but it's also music interspersed throughout, and it's based on a true story. Some of the other musicals that I care for, Moulin Rouge, again, I sort of talked about that. Chicago, those are some of my standouts, but I will sit down and watch a musical to sort of evaluate it for its hummability potential. If you get an earworm out of a musical, then in my opinion, it's at least a decent one. And if you get a couple, 2 or 3, then it's even better. That's kind of my grade for a good musical. Even watching The Muppets, and I'm talking about the television show, it's a variety show, so there's music interspersed, but you would see the characters sing in the middle of it and then find out it was part of the show. But when they made the first Muppet movie, it was a musical, a Goofy movie. It's a musical. So you find that there's music in the movies, but sometimes it's even more special when they actually break out in song and give you a much closer look at their emotions because you're adding the music to it. Have you ever listened to a song and felt sad, even without a movie involved, just heard a song that reminded you of a time or a place?
Well, not so much reminded me, but yeah, there's actually some music that I have on my iPod that gives me that lump in my throat because it takes me somewhere where I'm not sure that I've ever been there, but for some reason I feel very emotional about it.
And, we even talked about it during our Casablanca episode. Everybody has music that moves them in some way, so when you see it in a movie, it's special. I mean, even Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, that's a musical.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's lots of musicals out there.
Yeah, of course there's that musical that, not to sound negative, but the musical that stays and it never went away. Since its release in the 70s, it's still playing in theaters. That people go and...
The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
People act out, that people sing, they play constantly because it's just that good.
It is.
It is.
It's a good movie. It was a good play.
Yeah.
So, going back to your question about what qualifies as a musical, there's a movie, and we'll probably be watching it around the house here soon because it's September, October's coming around the way, and soon it will be Halloween. And Christy is a huge fan of Hocus Pocus. And there's a point in that movie where Bette Midler's character goes up on the stage and starts singing. But it's still not a musical because she's not singing about her emotions, and it's just a performance in the middle of the movie. And it fits in, with the location. So what qualifies as a musical? Hocus Pocus does not. But we still have, a metric ton of movies that you might not consider a musical, but they are.
I was almost half expecting you to talk Nightmare Before Christmas.
We have that as well. That's not one of my standouts. Christy likes it a lot. I enjoy it. To be honest, it doesn't really hit me in that memorable, I got to keep watching this kind of spot.
Oh, that's funny because again, me not being a huge fan of musicals, that one definitely I find myself singing a lot. This Is Halloween, even Sally's song. Sometimes I'll hum to myself. Yeah, and especially at Disneyland this time of year, they shift the Haunted Mansion from its standard Haunted Mansion to the Nightmare Before Christmas look to it. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
I went to Disney World in October, but I don't recall what they had done with the Magic Kingdom with the Haunted Mansion.
Okay, well, here in SoCal, from mid-September to just after New Year's, it's the Nightmare Before Christmas themed Haunted Mansion, where the cast takes over the Haunted Mansion. And as you're going through it, you see different scenes and whatnot. Not from the movie, but I mean, it's just basically they have it all done up. The scary wreaths are on the doors, and these man-eating plants singing, This Is Halloween, or no, Making Christmas theme, but very, very weirdly that I like, because it's like, la, 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 la. It's just all throughout. And most people, it's just like some people would be, enough already, but nah, I love it. And where the caretaker is, the graveyard caretaker, Jack Skellington will be there with Zero.
Oh, okay,
so,
cool.
It's pretty cool. It's
nice.
like, for a few months out of the year, you get that.
Cool. Like I said, I haven't been there in a while, so I'm not absolutely certain what they did. One of the other musicals that I actually like a lot, and it could be a little bit of nostalgia, is the Disney partially animated movie Pete's Dragon, or not the remake,
yeah,
but I mean the original, and the dragon was animated.
Yeah, with
Helen Reddy was in it.
Mickey Rooney.
Yep, it's just fun when the little rednecks come out and they start singing, "We got a bill of sale right here." They're like, who the hell writes a song about having a bill of sale? Well, apparently Disney does, and it was fun because it worked into the movie. But again, musical, had it forever.
Yeah, I think I got that on Blu-ray. I think I found it really cheap, and I decided to buy it. Because I remember my mom taking me to see that in theaters a long time ago.
So, you were talking about going to Guam and seeing Jurassic Park. In 1994, we were on deployment. This is one of the bonding moments that you have on a ship with sailors, and I'm sure you've experienced it. But we pulled into Darwin, Australia, and we had been on deployment for, I think, about 5 months at that point. We were on our way back. And maybe it was 5.5. Anyway, we had stopped in Australia, and we'd sort of already painted the town a little bit, and it was a full Liberty port, which for our listeners means that the only time you have to work is when you have duty and you're required to be on the ship. So we basically had 1 day on, 2 days off. So 3 or 4 of us, adult male humans, because we didn't have any women on the ship yet, went out to the Australian theater in the middle of the day and went and saw The Lion King, which is a musical because they're singing in the middle of it and they're singing their emotions. And on our way back to the ship to go get ready to go, get dinner, we were just walking through the streets of Darwin singing Hakuna Matata. Because why not? It was funny because I was 24 at the time, so mid-20s to mid-30s, just that age range, and we're just running Hakuna Matata, what a wonderful phrase. And then sometimes what we would do with songs is we would just change the words up to whatever fit the moment, and it just sort of brought everything back in, and we all had a good laugh, and it was a good time. So we didn't get scared because of jungle things. We just sang a song, and it made us happy.
Well, different experiences, I guess,
Yeah, so you said probably hundreds of horror movies?
Yeah, that's a safe assumption.
So let's modify the "where does this belong on your shelf" to say, where do most of the horror movies that you have belong on your shelf? Would you say that you have a lot of great ones and you have some that you just happen to pick up because you're like, oh, well, I haven't seen this in a long time. Oh, yeah, now I remember why I hadn't seen this in a long time.
I don't have a lot of the, I know why I haven't seen this in a long time. I mean, it's like, yeah, again, modest budget. You try to make your purchases count. But that said, I mean, predictably, most of them are in the middle of the bell curve. They reside in general population. But there are a lot of standouts. Alien, of course. I have the Alien quadrilogy on Blu-ray. I'm one of the few people that rather enjoyed all 4.
Speaking of which, I just watched Alien Resurrection on one of the movie channels the other day. And yeah, it's not great. It's definitely
It's not horrible either. I didn't think it was horrible. I rather enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a different take. I mean, I'm glad they stopped making Ripley movies after that, because had they gone any farther, they would have completely destroyed the character.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the worst thing they could have done.
So, like I said, I got that. I don't know if you can consider Godzilla horror movies, but I do. I think they occupy the spectrum of horror movies the same as caffeine occupies the spectrum of mind-altering drugs.
Okay.
A rather mild form of such. But yeah, they have their own little section, because I'm almost completed that. I have almost all his movies. I think I got like 3 or 4 more to find. Unfortunately, there's a couple that are very rare. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, the original 1974 one. Apparently, I can't even find it on Amazon for less than $200.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not a full production copy, so you have to find rare copies.
Okay. Well, I mean, that'll be that much better when you do finally get it.
When it finally does come up, they'll sell it for $10, which I'll be perfectly okay with. But yeah, I wouldn't say that I have any horror movies that occupy the absolute top shelf. I'd say at the most, like you said, just below the top shelf in special place of honor type of shelf. But like I said, they do feature pretty heavily in my collection. There's not any want for, like, if you have a horror movie, you could sneeze at my shelf and hit quite a number of them.
It's an interesting mix of metaphors. I don't want to hit anything on your shelf with something I sneezed, so...
But oddly enough, though, like I said, my shelves are not completely bereft of musicals, and I don't quite have as many, but they are as varied as my horror movies as far as general population and special places. Obviously, like I said, the Disney collection, which has its own section.
Yeah, I will say for me that most of the musicals that I own, I would consider at worst near the top shelf, just because I'm particular about the musicals that I get or that I let into my life. It's a particular privilege for a musical to be allowed into my house, because I have to have an attachment to it generally. Like Moulin Rouge, I don't have any particular emotional attachment to, but I really enjoy the music. I really enjoy their performance, because I think that Ewan McGregor and Nicole Kidman are very good actors. The Disney movies, those are just, for the most part, bubblegum fun. And Grease has an emotional attachment, because whenever I watch it, I think about my mom. And I've passed that on to my kids. I didn't tell this story. When I was, just a couple of years ago, there was a Grease in the Theater sing-along thing that I took my kids to. Well, okay, I took my daughter and some friends of hers, and they all dressed up like characters from the movie. And we sat there in the movie theater and just sang along with the songs, because it was fun.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think I passed that on to them. But I would say most of the musicals that I own are leading edge of the second shelf, if not up on the top shelf, because they have that emotional attachment.
Interesting. One last thing I just want to ask is, because my movie collection, Blu-ray/DVDs and everything, a lot of times I like to get special editions. As I mentioned, I have the Alien Quadrilogy, has 4 Alien movies in one box set on Blu-ray, which also includes different versions of each movie, as well as special features that I really like that talk about the making of and other little trivia things that may come out and everything. Do you find yourself that, you just buy the straight musical? It's like you just want the movie, you don't really care about special features, or, because most of the musicals that I own are just straight, here's the musical, watch it, love it, enjoy it.
Yeah, there are some, like the Rock of Ages that we got was the extended edition, so it included the theatrical version and the extended edition, which had an additional song. Hearing the song, I enjoyed it. I could see why they left it out. The High School Musical movies, we have the extended edition because, well, that's what we got. I'm not too particular about whether or not I have the extended edition. It depends on what songs are included. And as far as a special edition, the Grease version that I have is the 25th anniversary, but it's just digitally remastered and there's nothing particularly special about it. There's an extra that's, like the making of, I think, 25 years later, that sort of thing. Where are they now? I'm not particularly married to the idea of having any of the extra stuff or anything like that.
Yeah, because for me, when I buy movies, especially when it comes to horror movies, I like to have the special features, especially if it has like different versions of the movie. Horror movies tend to have a lot of scenes that they left out, and a lot of times it's like for obvious reasons, too intense, or they're just really dumb. But just it to me, it's extra added entertainment, especially the making of too. There's some great making of, or the history of, especially with the older ones. Night of the Living Dead, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, some great stuff and everything. So that's me.
Okay, cool. All right. So we've talked about how we sort of got into these genres. We talked about the genres themselves. We discussed where they sort of belong on your shelf, or where the bulk of the ones that you have belong there. So now I do believe that it is time to hit the random magic movie button so we can get back to doing randomly generated movies. So without further ado, we're going to push that button.
Insidious.
Oh, how ironic is that?
Yeah, well.
This must be from your collection, because I know I don't own this.
You're going to enjoy it.
Oh, goody.
Watch it alone in the dark with your headphones.
Oh, good. Yay. Thanks.
I look forward to that conversation.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Yeah. Yay.
Hey, and it's appropriate. Halloween is approaching.
That is true. So I will look at it with an open mind, and I've heard that it's a good one, so...
I think as far as ghost stories in a contemporary sense, I think it's one of the better ones.
Okay. I will take your word for it.
No pun intended, but, with Halloween coming, we are keeping in the spirit of things.
Don't go near there. All right, goodbye, Dan. So, yeah, I guess we will see you in 2 weeks with...
Insidious.
I'm so looking forward to that. Share my joy. Share my joy. Before we check out, I wanted to remind you of all the ways that you can contact us. You can check us out on our Facebook page. We'll review it ourselves. You can hit us up on our email at wrios2016mr@gmail.com. You can go to the Podbean page. You can leave us a review on the iTunes. You can check us out on the Google Play. And you can share us with your friends. On the Facebook page, you can click that little forwardy arrow thing and say share to your page so that other people know what you're listening to and that you're enjoying it. So if you like us, tell your friends, and we'll see you in 2 weeks with Insidious. Peace out.